So you've done the reading and you've written a thesis, but how do you know if it's any good? My name is Lusia Zaitseva and I teach writing at Harvard University. I'm also the founder of IvyWrite. In today's video, I'm going to be going over the 4 things you need to know to write a great thesis that genuinely interests both you and your reader. Plus, stay tuned for the end of the video for a bonus tip for what to do once you've got your great thesis. Before we begin, if you haven't seen my videos on how to come up with a thesis in the first place, go watch those now and then come back here when you're done. I'll wait. Okay, so now you've done that and you've come up with an answer to your analytical question. In other words, the main argument or thesis of your paper. Now let's take a look and see if it's any good. As you'll remember from the video on analytical questions, you want to make sure you have a question that you can actually reasonably answer in the time you have. Now that you've got your thesis, ask yourself this: do you actually need the text or texts that you're meant to be working with in order to support it with evidence? If you don't, and if you're resorting to generalizations or maybe outside research that you're not meant to be doing, then you've got a problem. Or if you're writing a research paper, do you need the sources that you found in order to answer your question? And is it even a feasible goal given the space and time that you have? This brings us to item 3 of the thesis test: complexity or scope. Are you being realistic, or have you bitten off way more than you can chew? Ideally, like Goldilocks and the proverbial bowl of porridge, you've got it just right. If you can't support your thesis convincingly with evidence in 5 pages, then you probably need to narrow your claim. And also, if you're struggling to fill up 10 pages and you've only got 3, unless there's just some obvious steps in your argument that are missing, you might need to broaden your claim. That's actually a pretty common problem. Students often think that they have nothing left to say, when in fact there's a bunch of basic steps that their argument needs to take in order to make sense for people living outside their head. I'll go over what to do in that situation and how to approach that problem in a later video. But for now, you can probably trust your gut. Basically, don't try to prove something about humanity in 5 pages. And likewise, don't think that you can fill up 50 pages talking about moonlight analysis in 1 poem by 1 poet. Okay, now you're ready for test number 2. Is your thesis arguable? In other words, could a reasonable person disagree with it? If not, then your thesis is too obvious. One reason why this happens is because students sometimes stick too close to the realm of description. For example, if you're writing about F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby, something like Gatsby is insecure about his social standing is not a good thesis because it's just a description and we can't really disagree with it. On the other hand, something like Gatsby embodies the truth that the elite fundamentally seek to exclude those whom they perceive as outsiders is actually starting to get somewhere interesting because it zooms out from describing Gatsby and starts to wrestle with what the novel might actually be about. Also, someone could say the complete opposite and argue instead that Gatsby's tragic fate is a cautionary tale against capitalism and materialist greed. If you think your thesis falls into the non-arguable category, try playing it a little bit less safe. Take a firm stance, let's call it A, and you can always acknowledge that B might also be the case and has some legitimacy as part of your counter-argument, which is something we'll talk about in a future video. If your thesis feels descriptive, try zooming out so that you go from observation to inference. For example, in the descriptive thesis that I gave a moment ago, that Gatsby is insecure about his social standing, the way that I got from that to one of the 2 interesting theses I cited later was just by trying to make sense of why it might be that Fitzgerald made Gatsby the character this way. In fact, both of the theses I came up with were just inferences based on that observation, and they're not immutably set in stone, so that gives people something to disagree about. A bonus tip, and this is something I like to do in my own writing, is that I put in the header of my document, so it follows me on every page, the words, "In this essay, I argue that." And if you find yourself unable to do this, if you write something like "I am exploring" or "I am writing about," then you don't have an argument yet, you just have a topic. That brings us to item number 1 of the thesis test. Would anyone actually want to read an essay in which this thesis is supported? Explorations of a topic are pretty painful for your reader. Does your thesis speak to a genuine dilemma in the sources and maybe even the world? If the answer is no, then I guarantee you, not only will you be super bored writing your essay, your reader will be super bored reading it. Make your essay interesting to you, and it will probably be interesting to someone else as well. After all, if you don't care about what you're writing, why should we? You'll remember a moment ago, I suggested you actually put in your header, "In this essay, I argue that." When you do that, it's much harder to lose track of what it is you're trying to do. This will also help you later on as you're drafting the body of your essay, because your thesis will actually help you find the structure of the essay itself. We'll talk about this more in a later video, but your thesis will actually encode within it a really logical structure for the steps you have to go through to convince anyone of what you're arguing. And remember, your thesis isn't going to stay exactly the same as you write. In fact, you hope that it won't. Realistically, as you think more and muck around in your sources, you're going to come up with new ideas, caveats, perhaps some counter arguments that undermine your original argument but help you build up a new and better one. Did you put your thesis to the test? And if so, how'd you do? Let me know in the comments down below, and please like this video and subscribe to the channel if you found it helpful. See you next time.